Hey guys, begin to another episode of When the Scriptures Become Real. It's a podcast where we learn, where we study, where we grow, where we try to become the best versions of ourselves as we can, as we continue to serve our Lord. You can guys find the podcast on YouTube or anywhere else you get your podcast. We're just so thankful that you guys are here, that you guys have found us, and that you're with us today. All right, guys, we are continuing in the book of Esther. This has been such a great study. You guys have been so great in your conversation with me as we're looking through this and as we're studying together. So I can't wait to keep going through this with you. So we're going to try to do something pretty special today. We're going to try to actually get through chapters, I believe, chapter 5, 6, and let's get like a little bit into 7, and then we'll set up kind of the finale for 8, 9, and 10 for next week. So again, go back and listen to everything else up to this point. There's a few parts here, so don't miss the foundation of things. But then as we move forward, you'll be able to understand where we're going and how we're going to continue to study here. So here's where we're going with today's podcast. There's 2 words that is going to be the theme that's very important. Now, the home base verse, we used this before, but the home base verse, again, is going to be Proverbs chapter 21, verse 1. That is going to be huge. It's going to be huge for us as we study, okay? So remember, Proverbs 21, 1, the king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord, and the Lord turns it wherever he wishes. Please keep that in mind. Proverbs 21:1. We will keep going back to that. Now, as we're getting started with our convo, here is the 2 words that in my life, and maybe in your life too, you can love it, but at the same time, you have like a disdain and a bad taste towards it. And here's what I mean. The 2 words are this: trust and timing. Trust and timing. Now, I will say, there is nothing like something happening in your life at the right time, but you had nothing to do with it. It's hard to explain. I really wish I could explain that more in depth, because there's so many moving pieces that you might not have influence over, or you might not even have had contact with, but the way God can orchestrate and move people and places, it's a different thing when that timing aligns and when that timing actually works and you didn't orchestrate it. It's different. You can make things happen, right? You can make a job happen. You can make a person come into your life. You can make these things happen because you force the issue. And you can somewhat look successful doing it, but it's a different feeling and it's a different understanding and it's a different patience when God sets it up and you literally had nothing to do with it, and all you did through the times that you understood and the times that you didn't understand, you just trusted God and did what you could. That's a different type. Now, that's the beautiful part of it. The hard part and the frustrating part about trust and timing is because you have no control. You're sitting here and it almost feels like in your life, because things keep happening, right? So it's not like life stops, and it's not like you don't stop growing and aging, and it's not like any of that stops, but you're almost kind of like a sitting duck in a way. Now, I'm not saying that you're not doing anything, you're not serving, you're doing a lot of really good things, but there's some things that you personally, because of your own strength, you can't set it up. So in that sense, it feels like you're a sitting duck, and it's frustrating because the trust and the timing of it, because you have no control over it, you're forced to be in a waiting room. You're forced. Now, there's a book by Rosemary McKnight. Is a great book, Rosemary McKnight, and it's called Those Who Wait. I've probably referenced that on previous podcasts before, but y'all need that. That is such a great book on waiting. But you're forced to wait in this waiting room. And as you're in this waiting room, like the natural thing, I don't like going to the doctor. I think the smell is weird. I don't like the office. I don't like filling out the thing. Like, it's not like it's bad. I just don't like it. It's just weird, you know? So you're sitting there and you're waiting for your turn. And as you're sitting in that waiting room, it literally doesn't matter if you're the first one in there. It doesn't matter if you've been in there for 3 minutes or 30 minutes. When the doctor's ready, based on however they do things back there, you could show up and you could have waited for 45 minutes. but someone else comes in, signs in, sits down, they go in 5. So you're like, wait, that doesn't make sense. I filled it out. I feel like I should be next in line. And then maybe based on your symptoms, maybe you feel like your situation is worse than someone else's situation that's sitting in the exact same waiting room, but they get help first. So now you're kind of sitting here and you're just like, okay, you're in this waiting room and you're a sitting duck. That's what it feels like to trust and to wait. This is the theme. This is the theme of Esther 5, 6, and 7. This is going to be extremely huge as we study this together. So let's dive back into Persia. Let's go back, right? We're diving back in together and let's study. So if you're taking a walk, if you're in the car, I can't wait to jump back in with you guys. So let's get started. So remember, just quickly, chapter 4. Remember, Esther has agreed to help the Jews. As Esther has agreed to help the Jews, remember, between Mordecai and Esther, they showed an image of what God and what Jesus would be, right? So as we see that image of what God would be and of what Jesus would be later, we see that imagery between Esther and Mordecai. So that's the main umbrella picture that we see in chapter 4. Now we're moving to chapter 5, verse 1. Notice what the text says. Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes, and she stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across the king's house, while the king sat on the royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was when the king saw that the queen was standing in the court. Now remember, quick pause. The only way that she could talk was what? The king had to put the scepter out. So you could stand in the court, but just because you're standing in the court doesn't mean you could talk. Remember, keep that in mind. She mentioned that in chapter 4, because remember, what did she tell Mordecai? Look, I know things are bad, but what am I going to do? I can only stand there. Like, there's really not much I can do. So what's Esther in, guys? She's in the waiting room. She's there. She understands the problem is huge. Mordecai understands the problem is huge. They've mourned already. They fasted already. But what can they technically do in this situation? By their own strength, by their own knowledge, by their own wit, they can do nothing else. Sometimes, guys, it gets to a point that in order to trust God, in order to wait on him, on his timing correctly, it's not necessarily what he has done for others, even though you should rejoice in that. It's not based on what he can do, even though you should hope in that. But sometimes, guys, there's times where you've done everything you know what to do, and sometimes God puts you in a place where I just have to sit in this waiting room, and I have to trust that God saw what I've tried to do, and I have to let him work. That's the frustrating space that some of you may be in. And in that space, when you've waited for so long, sometimes you want to rush the process, right? You get so frustrated. You're like, man, forget this. Like, I'm tired of this. We're just going to make something happen, because if I make something happen, it's better than just waiting. At least I know, right? At least I have an answer, whether it's good or bad. At least I know for a fact now. But here, it's way better than just sitting here and hoping that something happens. What if it doesn't? Then you'll never know. So I might as well make a move, right? That is the space where you will become the most frustrated, because you're going to argue with yourself and you're going to argue with God why a move shouldn't be made. And what he's going to want you to do is trust in his hand that moves people and the king like channels of water. That is one of the hardest things to do, because you get frustrated in the wait and you get angry in the wait. But notice what Esther and Mordecai are doing. They're showing us how to do this. Now, verse 2. When the queen was standing in the court, she found favor in his sight. Verse 2. The king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Esther went near and touched the scepter, and the king said, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given up to you up to half of the kingdom." Now, watch this. So Esther answers, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him." Now, I want you to keep this in mind. Now, ladies, let's shift our focus to Esther. We spent a lot of time on Mordecai, but ladies, let's go to Esther real quick. I want you to think about this. Think about what Esther has seen in chapter 4. She knows that her people are going to be absolutely destroyed. She understands that Mordecai is mourning, and she understands that now the responsibility feels like it's on her to make a move. So now, what would most people do, right? If I was in that situation, if you were in that situation, I got to make something happen now. I mean, things are dire. Things are desperate. If I don't do something, if somebody else doesn't say something, if somebody else doesn't do anything, things are just going to get worse. So we have to sit here as a think tank and we got to get something figured out. Because if we don't get something figured out, nothing's going to get done. That's how most problems are always handled within families, within churches, within homes. That's how most problems are handled. We got to figure it out. When things get the most dire, we got to figure it out. Well, Jordan, how do you know that? Because the most times where things didn't work for me is when I put myself in that situation. I got to figure this out. Or you see others, we got to figure this out. That's not our role to figure this out. So notice what Esther could have done. Esther could have said right there, things are so dire, she could have touched the scepter. And after she touched it, ladies, guess what she could have said? She could have went off on Haman. Haman's doing this. He's doing that. You need to kill him. You need to do all this. She could have just went ballistic on Haman, couldn't she? But notice, what did Esther do? Timing. Even in desperate and difficult and insanely hard situations, somebody has to have enough wisdom on their shoulders from God to look at how bad the situation is and still trust God in his timing. Somebody's got to be wise enough to do that. So now, in this situation, who was that? Mordecai, I think he did that well, but also Esther. Timing is huge. And notice, when we try to rush the time of things because we want it to happen now, 100 times out of 100 times, you will always jump ahead and you will always try to rush the process. Now, let me give you a warning. And here's the warning, because what you could see, it's deceitful. When you rush the process and when you see others rush the process, there is a period of time, regardless of how long that is. Maybe that's a year, maybe that's 3, maybe that's 5. There is a period of time. Even if you rush the process, there is a time where things seemingly on the outside seems like it's working out. So young guys, women out there, do not be deceived when you see that window. Man, they just made it happen and it's just working out, man. And then what am I doing over here? I'm over here trusting God. I'm over here waiting on his time. Guess what? They could say they did the same thing, but they're moving. So what's wrong with me? Maybe I'm the insane one. Maybe I'm the one that's waiting on God. Is that even a thing now? I mean, is that the right thing to do? Everyone else said they were waiting on. So you see the conversations that start going, and now those conversations are going to start floating on in your head. Don't look at that. What you have to do is, in this aspect of your Christian walk, and as you are following Christ, because what did Jesus always say? Follow me. As you, as an individual, as you follow him, do not be rash. You don't know how God has moved in other people's lives. You don't know what God did for other people's lives, and you don't understanding the timing of other people's lives. That is God, and that is them following God. You do not rush it. I do not care even if you are the very last one. In whatever sense of the word that is, you do not rush it, because the things that you cannot see, you don't see what happens in the house. You don't see the conversations. You don't see those things that people don't post on social media. You don't see that aspect of it. You only see what they present. Do not be rash because everybody else, seemingly God has made things work for them. Do not rush that process. Will you feel insane? Yes, you will. You will feel insane. What's wrong? Why is it not? You will feel crazy, but that means you're on the right path. You will feel insane, absolutely crazy, but you cannot rush this process. You cannot do it. as much as you want to, as much as you feel like you should, because at least you have an answer. You cannot rush him because you don't want to move a piece. You don't want to have an effect where you move a piece that God wasn't ready to move yet. And that is a frustrating thing when you do that. And it just the domino effect of how that messes things up for you. You just don't want that. Please listen. You just don't want that. Okay. Don't rush the process. So now notice what Esther's doing. Esther is having trust and she's trusting God's timing. She could have said, but no, why don't we just invite Haman? Or what? So can you imagine how other Jews may have been talking about Esther? Oh, she's not really standing up for us. She says she cares for us and she loves God. How come she didn't say anything? You know, another reason why we rush the process, because other people and other Christians and congregations, what happens sometimes is when you don't do something the exact way that they want it done, then you hear what they say about you. Well, if you cared about God, you would have said this quicker. If you cared about me, you would have said this quicker. If you cared about us, you would have done this quicker. So then you fall for that. And then now guess what you're doing? Now you're rushing the process. Don't fall for that either. Sometimes, guys, you got to get to a point where things are absolutely insane. You have to get to the point of where David was, where he had to encourage himself in the Lord. Everybody else says I'm crazy. Everybody else doesn't agree. Everybody else said I should have done things this way and should have said things this way. That's what everybody else said. But I got to trust this process, even if I'm the only one that thinks this is right. You will feel crazy, but that's the right thing to do. Not a lot of people want to take that path. And if you're on that path, I just want to pause this. If you're on that path, please reach out to us. You're reaching out directly to me. And it's not because of me. We're going to encourage one another. We need more people that see things like this. So let's talk, let's study, let's pray for God to strengthen you and to help you and encourage you and have someone else to be there to encourage you while you're going through this, because you will feel crazy. This is not what I thought it was. Remember, we even looked at that with Moses. We didn't ask you to save us, Moses. Why are you here? Why did you do all this? You made things worse for us. This is different stuff, man. Trusting God and trusting his timing, even among God's people, is hard. Even among his own people, it's hard. It's a very difficult road. And if you want to walk this path, just be prepped to walk by yourself. Be prepped. Okay? Just be prepped. Now, verse 6. At the banquet of the wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your request up to half the kingdom?" So now guess what this is? This is an opportunity to rush the process. Then Esther says, "My petition and request is this. If I found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition, fulfill my request. Let the king and Haman come to a banquet that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." Isn't it very interesting? She's still trusting that process. Very interesting. I love this idea. Love this idea. Verse 9, as we keep going, notice what the text says. This is great. So Haman, now notice things from Haman's point of view. So Haman went out that day joyful and with a glad heart. When Haman saw that Mordecai was in the king's gate and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation towards Mordecai. Isn't it very interesting? Just a quick note. Remember in chapter 4, when all this stuff went down, Mordecai, the Bible says, was outside of the gate mourning. But now where is Mordecai? According to what Haman said in verse 9, Mordecai is inside the gate, which indicates what? Mordecai had his time to mourn, but Mordecai is trusting God's timing and process too. Mordecai is not sitting there rushing Esther. Esther's not rushing Mordecai. Both of them are waiting on God's timing. It's a beautiful, beautiful image of what's happening. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman told him of his great riches and multitude of his children and everything the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited me and no one else but me to come in with the king. And tomorrow I'm invited by her along with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing, so as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Isn't it very interesting? I want to notice just a few things. Number one, when Haman talked about all of his children and all of his riches. Now, I'm not saying that this is true, but this is an interesting note that just put it in your notes because this is insane if it is true. According to the Jewish Targum, it is stated, this is insane if this is true, that Mordecai, or not Mordecai, that Haman had 108 children. If that's true, that's next level stuff. 108 children. So what is he boasting about? Look at everything I've got. Look at the multitude of my children. Look at the multitude of my riches. And by the way, Queen Esther invited me in, and she didn't invite anybody else in. But now notice what he says. He says, yet all this stuff avails nothing to me. I just want to see Mordecai killed. Here's a danger for those who are good and those who are bad. We both can have the spirit of Haman. What? Listen to this. So on the bad side, because of the power, because of the riches and boasting in those things, as you learn to boast in those things, you begin to learn that the more that you receive and the more that you're working for and the more that you're working towards, sometimes you're always going to want more. It avails me nothing because I need this one. Or I need this. So sometimes that's going to be the spirit of Haman that you have. But sometimes good people can have the spirit of Haman, and sometimes good Christian people can have the spirit of Haman. What? How is that possible? I want you to think about this. When Jesus said to follow me, when Jesus said to serve him, when Jesus showed us how to serve, Philippians chapter 2, when the Hebrews writer told us to look unto Jesus, Hebrews chapter 12. I want you to think about this concept. Even as a good person who's trying to follow Christ and as you try to help people, you can have the spirit of Haman because you see, man, all these people were helping, but it seems like this group is always the one that's giving me problems. This group is always this. They're always that. Forget all the good that we're doing. Forget all the great things that we're doing. It's always this. So what we're going to do, we're going to start catering our sermon so we can speak just to that group. We're going to start doing this so this group can listen. So you see what we're doing? We have the spirit of Haman because we're not seeing all the good that God is doing. All we're seeing is all these great things are happening with the kingdom, but the only thing that my eyes can focus on is all this bad. So I'm just going to talk about how everything is bad and how the church is just dying all the time. There's nothing good happening. You see where we could be too? So we have to be careful because even on the good side, we can have the reverse spirit of Haman where we see the good things, but the only thing that we talk about and focus on is everything going wrong. So Haman, all these things that are happening, you know what? All that means nothing. I just need Mordecai to bow. God is doing all these great things, but let's just talk about all this. You see what we can do? You see how subtly, guys. And sometimes we feel like if we talk like that, well, it's really complaining. And when you really think about it from this point of view, it's all pride. It just comes in different packages. You see why pride is so subtle and pride just sleeps in. And sometimes you don't even see that's prideful, but the more you really examine yourself, that's pride. Pride it just slips in. Well, it's not as boastful and loud and arrogant as them. Sure. But just because it's not as boastful and loud doesn't mean it's not pride. Pride is pride. Pride is pride. So what are we going to say? And then how does God view it? Whether it's arrogant and loud or whether it's not, what is it to God? It's uplifting yourself. And where in scripture does God ever say we should do that? If we're honest, we're answering that question the right way, but I'll let you answer that. Now, as we keep reading, notice verse 13. Yet all this avails me nothing. We read that for 14. Then his wife Zeresh and his friend said, let a gallows be made 50 cubits high in the morning. Suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman. And so he had the gallows made. I want to just to give it just a quick. Now we could go deep and we could really go like pretty graphic with this, but I'm not going to. But the gallows here, when they built these gallows weren't like the medieval time gallows, right? Where you would build the gallows high and then you would hang someone from rope. That's not Persian gallows. Persian gallows, I'll just say this, the person that's on the gallows, you would become the pole. Okay, this is a different type of death. This is not just like hanging from that. You become one with the pole. You were impaled, right? It's a very gruesome thing. So notice he's so happy. And then his wife says, you know what, you need to build this. And then you need to come tomorrow and you need to rejoice because what you want is going to happen. So now let's think about this. Let's think about the control thing that we talked about. Let's think about the timing and the trust thing we've been talking about. Now I want you to insert yourself, and I'm going to be 100% honest with you if I'm living in this time and if I'm Mordecai or if I'm Esther. If we've seen everything that has happened from chapter 1 to chapter 6, 1 to 5, if I've seen all that stuff, it would be very hard for me to trust God's timing and for me not to feel like I got to say something. I got to do something. I got to make something happen. Because if I don't, things are just going to get worse. It would be hard for me to sit in that waiting room. But notice what Esther and Mordecai is teaching us. They're teaching us, look at how terrible things are. Look at all the opportunities that we had to speak up for ourselves. Look at all the opportunities that we had to rush the process. But we saw how, and sometimes people feel like if you trust God's timing, you're naive. Well, you didn't make a move like I did. Well, you didn't go search like I did. Well, you didn't speak up like I did. There's this like demeaning, and that's another danger too, is even from the outside and even Christians, you will get demeaned because it feels like you're not making moves. So now because other people are telling you that they're not making moves, and then they say, well, look at all the moves that we made, then you're going to feel pressure to have to make a move because they did and it worked out. So now if they did it, then that means I got to do it, right? Young people, college people, middle-aged people, older people, please listen. Do not let someone who doesn't know God and do not let someone who knows God rush your process of what God is doing. Do not let them do that. Does it mean you have to be mean and a jerk to them? Absolutely not. We don't have to be that type of person. But do not let demeaning words and maybe even a sense of Jordan is naive. Other people are naive. Nothing's going to happen if he just sits and waits and trusts God. He should just be like us. Do not rush the process. Do not move. Do not move. You wait on your God, young man. You wait on God, young woman. Do not let, and even a parent, don't let anyone else, an elder, a preacher, don't let anybody rush your process. Do not let it happen. Do not let it happen. And if you're by yourself, you're not by yourself while you're here with this community here. You will not have to walk this road alone. Okay? Do not do it. So now chapter 6. Look at how terrible things are. Now it's literally the 11th hour. All this is getting ready to go down tomorrow. This is it. All this stuff from chapter 1 to 5, we're prepped and it's about to go down tomorrow. It's the 11th hour. And guess who says who's in control? Guess who hasn't moved for any of us yet? Quote unquote. I'm putting up air quotes. Guess who hasn't moved for us? God. He just let this happen. He just let Haman celebrate. He just let Haman be elevated. He just let the men of Persia do whatever they want. He just let the king do whatever he wants. What's he doing for the Jewish people? Seemingly nothing. What's he doing for Mordecai? Seemingly nothing. What's he doing for Esther? Seemingly nothing. So guess what? God's not in control. That's how you can feel with your life too. But I want you to notice something beautiful about how God works. Verse 1 of chapter 6. That night, the king could not sleep. What's our home base verse? Proverbs 21:1. The king's heart is like channels of water, and the Lord moves it however he wishes. When did the Lord decide to move the king's heart? At the 11th hour, the unexpected hour. See, sometimes with God, I want you to think about certain times in your life, and I want you to think about pockets where you look back, or maybe you look in the present, and you said, man, why didn't the Lord do something? Why didn't the Lord aid? Why didn't the Lord help? Why did the Lord let this happen? Why did he let people say stuff? Why was that cool? Like, why was that right? And so then your faith and your trust and the waiting for God seems pointless because he's not really in control. At least for you, he's not, right? He's just not in control. There has to be something wrong with you, right? God's not moving for me. I guess I'm just not the one he moves for. I guess I'm just not the type that God moves for. I'm not a chosen one, I guess. So then you start demeaning God, but then now you start demeaning yourself and who you are to God. But notice what God does. In those moments and in those time pockets where we thought, man, God should have moved here. How come God just let things happen? God moves when you least expect it. This is the unexpected hour. This is what God is. What's he doing? This is when no one's awake. God is moving. God is moving. And I love how God at the 11th hour is literally just like in his hands. He's just channeling the king's heart like water. Now it's time to move. Now it's time to move. That's insane. Let's keep going. So because the king couldn't sleep, one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found that Mordecai had told Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers who had sought to lay hands on the king, that the king said, what honor of dignity has been bestowed upon Mordecai for this? The king's servant said, well, nothing. Nothing's been done for him. So keep this. I want you to keep this in mind too. Fellas, ladies, please, this 100,000% applies to you. Please don't think it doesn't apply to you. It 100% applies to you. But because he's talking about Mordecai, fellas, because of our pride and ego, I want you to hear this. There's going to be times, guys, that you're going to help people in magnificent ways. You're going to be the only one that's there for him at times. You're going to be the one that's going to help at times. You're going to be their only lifeline. And sometimes it counts for nothing in other people's eyes. And sometimes it might be forgotten. But fellas, what you're going to have to do as you serve God is you have to get very comfortable in the shadows. And what I mean by the shadows is this. Mordecai did all that good, but who was rewarded for all that? Haman. Sometimes, guys, as you follow Christ, and what did Jesus say? Follow me. When you follow him, when a man follows God and a man helps people not to get elevated, but a man helps people because that's what Jesus said. And so sometimes, guys, it's going to get frustrating to you from a human level. Is naturally when you help people, you want people to remember. Maybe you want people to see, well, man, you did something good. Sometimes, guys, no one's ever going to know other than God. No one will ever know other than God. And guess what? Do we ever find Mordecai complaining? How come I wasn't the one elevated? How come I wasn't the one chosen in this position? How come I wasn't the one chosen to be here? Guys, be comfortable in the shadows. Personally, I love being in the shadows. I love helping and then just, I'm out. There's a burden that comes with being elevated. I'll leave it at that. Sometimes when you seek elevation, and even when you don't seek it, and then when you get it, there's a burden that comes with it, and there's an expectation that comes with it that people don't talk about, and there's a dark side to it. And I just don't want you as guys and as ministers, I don't want you to get caught up in the dark side of it, because the elevation's not natural. Jesus said the first will be last and the last will be first. He who will be greatest, let him be a servant. When we think about a servant in biblical times, it's demeaning, gross work that no one sees. Guys, leaders of your home, leaders of congregations, leaders of yourselves as singles and individuals, you need to get comfortable doing the work in the shadows. Nobody knows about it. Be comfortable being in the shadows. You don't need all that stuff. Now, if those things come, be humble. Be as humble as you possibly can. Be appreciative as you possibly can, but do not seek it. Mordecai didn't. Now, verse 4. The king says, who's in the inner court? Now, Haman just entered into the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king should hang Mordecai. Now, watch how God's moving that water. I love how God's moving that water. So Mordecai or Haman's happy in chapter 5. Then God moves the king's heart. Haman comes in to try to kill Mordecai. And then the king says, how come Mordecai wasn't elevated? I love how God's just, now you see pieces start going like crazy. And sometimes, guys, it's an awesome thing to see God move pieces. And you're just like, I had nothing to do with that. But he's just moving. This is crazy. It's supernatural. It's outside of us. And that's okay. And sometimes we feel like, well, because we can't explain it, then that's not happening. Like, come on now. God is supernatural. So will God move in ways that we don't understand? Yes. Will God move in ways that we do understand? Yes. Either way, God is God. So let's not be so prideful to be, God, whatever you want to do, you do that. This is what's happening. 5, the king's servant said, Haman is there standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in and the king asked him, what will be done for the man who the king delights to honor? Look how God's setting this up. Now he's literally reversing and 180ing the whole thing. Haman thought in his heart, whom the king would delight to honor more than me. Esther just invited me to a banquet twice. Now the king's talking about if I would honor somebody, who would I honor? Well, since you asked, verse 7, Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let this happen. A royal robe be put on him. The king has worn, a horse which the king has ridden, which a royal crest will be on his head. Then let the robe and the horse be delivered to the hand of the king's most noble princes, that he might array the man whom the king delights in honor. Then parade that man on horseback through the city square and proclaim with him, thus it shall be done to the man that the king shall honor. Look how specific he was, because who's Haman really talking about? Himself. Now, quick flashback. Let's take a quick flashback to Genesis. Remember, Pharaoh asked almost the same question. What man is going to do the things that you just said, Joseph? You said that there's going to be 7 years of plenty. You said there's going to be 7 years of famine. So, Joseph, I just got you out of jail to tell me this dream. I want you to tell me, what type of man should I pick so that we could do this? What did Joseph say? Did Joseph elevate himself? Well, I mean, see, this is what we'll do. And isn't it interesting that sometimes we've all done this? So now think about what Joseph could have said. Man, this could be an opportunity. Like maybe this is God moving to elevate me. Maybe this is God giving me an opportunity that I've always kind of secretly wanted. Maybe this is God giving me a position. So you know what? I'll just kind of a roundabout way. I'll kind of say something, but I kind of hope that he'll give it to me. Notice what Joseph did. Joseph said, let you pick him. Joseph, guess what he learned? He learned humility. God will pick the man. Then who did Pharaoh pick? Joseph. Think about Haman. Who is he in a roundabout way talking about? himself. Guys, ladies, never try to think and to talk about yourself to others in a roundabout way. If God wants it for you, he wants it for you. If God doesn't want it for you, he doesn't want it for you. That's just how it's going to happen. Okay, so as we move on now, verse 12. Here we go. So afterwards, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house with his head covered. He was mourning. So again, remember at 11, he said, look, let all the best robe, Haman, you put it on Mordecai and you lead him through the city square, verse 11, and you proclaim all these things. Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king delights. Afterwards, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman, verse 12, he went to his house mourning with his head covered. Isn't it very interesting how God can turn the tide? Before he was rejoicing because everything was seemingly going his way. But now he's coming back, even though he was going there to give destruction. Now God made him go back crying. You know, that's the power of our God, is God can take things like that and situations like that and people like that. And if we wait and if we trust his timing, he can 1,000 trillion% flip that, not to our favor, but how he controls things. It's ridiculous how much our God can do if we trust him. And at times, is it hard to trust that? Especially when all these things it's hard to trust that. But just because it's hard to trust it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. Okay. God can do great things, whether he does it for you or whether he doesn't. It doesn't mean that God is not great. Keep that in mind. All right. So 13. Haman told his wife and all his friends what had happened, and the wise men, verse 13, and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, whom you've begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail, but you will surely fall before him. While they were talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Haman had prepared, or which Esther had prepared. Now this is the banquet. Now all this is happening. Hey, you still have a banquet to come to, right? Man, I don't want to go now because I'm not going to be uplifted. I'm not going to be this person anymore. Let's go. You've been summoned. Now 7. So the king and Haman went to dine with Esther. On the second day at the banquet, the king said to Esther, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It will be granted to you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom. It will be done. Then Esther said, if I found favor in your sight, and if it please the king, let my life given be at your petition and my people at your request. For we have been sold, my people and not. Now notice, because the tide has turned, notice the king said the same thing to Esther in chapter 6 and chapter 5, the exact same thing the king said. But notice, Esther didn't take things into her own hands, even though she could have. But now what did Esther see? She saw God move. The thing that Jesus said in Matthew with the disciples, before he told them to pray in the garden, he said one word that a lot of us don't do anymore. He said, watch. See, a lot of times we're very reactionary. Somebody says something, somebody does something, somebody posts something. Then what do we have to do? Boom, I got to say something. Boom, they got to know what Jordan says on it. Boom, now I got to make a video on it. Boom, now I got to have a sermon on it. Boom, now I got to. You see what we're doing? We become reactionary. So now when something happens, I got to say something. We don't know how to watch anymore. So now notice, what was Esther doing this whole time during these banquets and before them? What was Esther doing? She's watching to see how God is moving the water. What you and I have to become, we have to learn to watch the water. What is God doing? The water's still right now. Things are terrible. God is not doing anything. Watch the water. Wait, the water is moving. Things are changing. Things that I can't control maybe now it's time. You see, Esther didn't trust her own self, her own strength, Mordecai's self, Mordecai's strength, the Jews' self, and the Jews' strength. What Esther did, she was watching the water. Young men, young women, learn to watch the water. Don't just make a decision just because you can or just because someone else did and it worked out. Watch the water. Okay, watch it. Now, verse 4. We've been sold. My people and I have been destroyed and killed and annihilated. Had we been sold, male and female slaves, I would not have held my tongue, although the enemy can never compensate for the king's loss. So the king Ahasuerus said, Who is he and where is he who would dare presume his heart to do such a thing? And Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is him, this wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. So the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went to the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life. Look at how things took the 180. Now, before, Haman, you were this big bad person. You were this big bad bully. Now the big bad bully's got nothing to say. You know, sometimes, guys, you will be treated with good people, quote unquote, and bad people. You will be treated like you're the bully. But don't take care of the bully yourself. God always takes care of the bully. Let him do it. What am I supposed to do in this? Do what Esther did. Trust and wait and trust God. Now, is that hard to do? It is. But just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. Now watch this. He's begging for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. Oh, now you know what it feels like, Haman. But now, isn't it interesting that Esther is not doing this to be like, well, now you know what this feels like. No, she's doing this because she trusts God. Now watch this, verse 7 or verse 8. So the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine. Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, will he assault the queen also while I'm at the house? And the word of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So now all this is happening. And notice how the situation is working in the favor of Esther, Mordecai, and the Jews. But are they technically doing something? They're technically not really controlling this. So is it possible that Haman could have been so drunk because of his sorrow that he fell in there's a lot of possibilities that could have happened. But what essentially happened is he was in close proximity. So now what's happening? Are you gonna assault my wife too while I'm gone? Now they're taking him. Watch this, verse 9. Now Harbonah, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who he spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. So they hung Haman on the gallows, which they prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. It's very interesting, guys. Quick notes. A lot of times you will want to take vengeance for yourself. And sometimes you'll be like, man, that would make me feel really good if I took vengeance for myself. Now, here's something else that I think is very important. What God is. Sometimes we look at God as your own personal hitman. Meaning this, well, you better not say something against me. If you say something against me, you know God's going to get you. If you say something against me, you know, that's not who God is. So let's stop making God our own personal bodyguard. He protects his people, but notice this is not something for you to gloat about. Don't touch me. Don't mess with me. Don't. So notice, did Esther have to say any of that? Did Mordecai have to say any of that? Why do we say that? Why do we say that with God? Does God love his people? Yes. Does God surround his people? Is God a shield about me, like David said? Absolutely, God is. God will always be that. But just like anything, you could take advantage of something that's good. And then now what are you doing? Now you're boasting. Did Esther have to do that? Did Mordecai have to do that? We got to be careful with that prideful mindset. So now notice, be careful who you try to lay traps for, because the same trap that you try to lay for someone else becomes your own. So when things happen, a lot of times, whether directly or whether a roundabout way, you kind of want to get your way. But many times, your way becomes the trap for yourself. So you got to be careful. And this is why in situations like this, what must we do? Even when bad things continuously happen to you, unfair things happen to you, you trust God and you trust his timing. And in the meantime, what do? You live out Matthew chapter 5, verses 3-9 in whatever situation you find yourself in. That is your life. And isn't it interesting? Just really, really quick. Remember in chapter 2, remember when we saw that the king came back from war and the Bible says that after the wrath of the king had subsided, then notice, what does it say at the end of verse 10 of chapter 7? Then the king's wrath subsided. Who controlled that like water? God. Proverbs 21:1. That's Esther. That's the next one. That's so good. I love looking at this. This book is incredible. So what we're going to do next week, we're going to finish this off, and we're going to do chapters 8, 9, and 10 as the finale. And this has just been such an awesome study. Again, if you guys are need encouragement, reach out. You will, I promise you, you will not be the first. It will be directly to me. It's not going to be a bot. It's not going to be a automated thing. It's going to come directly to me. Reach out to me, and then we can talk. We can pray together. We can look at the scriptures together. We can study and conversate together. We've had people reach out. I've met some of my best friends through this podcast. And so we want you to become a part of what we have going on here. And we just want you guys to feel like you don't have to do this by yourself. There's other good people that's really trying to love Jesus and follow God. So we love you guys, man. We appreciate you guys. Lord willing, next week we will finish up with chapters 8, 9, and 10. So Lord willing, we'll see you guys then. Thanks, guys.